All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Robert Lauer. We're at his home in Salem. It's August 2nd, 2021. Thanks so much for joining us today, Robert. We appreciate this.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm glad to be a part of such a big project amongst giants.
Thank you so much. First question to get us started is why wine?
So for me, wine kind of started with differentiating my time in port visits in the Navy from those of my other shipmates. So a lot of times, regardless of where you went, you'd have a big group of the ship congregating just to the nearest bar as soon as possible. To be fair, we were out there for quite a while, so no disrespect to what people's interests are, but it really gave me a chance to kind of take a break from a lot of those folks and really engage with the countries that I was visiting. And then, you know, from there, it stuck around even after the Navy. I was studying sciences with an interest in medicine, but still cooking a lot. Well, when you get out of the Navy, you get a chance to have a stove in front of you. You're stoked, and to be able to go to the grocery store and make it yourself rather than, you know, worry about the galley. And so that cooking aspect brought the wine into my life a little bit more steadily. And then it was really a phone call conversation that ironically was what I would want to do with my career or life if I didn't have to worry about money. And wine was making wine in particular, not necessarily just drinking wine, was the immediate answer. And a Google search popped up UC Davis first. And again, no discredit to the other programs at Cal Poly or Fresno. It never even was, I didn't know that was an option to go and study. So when I saw that it was there, I just immediately changed my focus in junior college to get all the credentials that I needed to transfer over there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that was the impetus, and then it's only spiraled out of control ever since. What's great about wine from my perspective is that it keeps a constant engagement, and it requires constant attention, and I've learned that the easy way and the hard way through the different mentors that I've had throughout my career. Ineffable was a word that Ben Castile used, which was, I thought that was so poignant, and that's exactly it. You can't really, it's not necessarily chasing the dragon, but along those lines where it's just you're never gonna catch it, sort of thing. You're always seeking to learn more and quote unquote do better next year. I know that this year is a great example, but it's hard to say that this year is so much different as an example than the other years, that especially in Oregon.
All right, so we'll come back to that in a second. I want to back up for a second and talk about kind of life before. So tell us about upbringing. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And what did you do after high school?
Yeah, so I'm from Michigan, and after high school, and I guess to back up a little bit, the agriculture aspect, I grew up in rural Michigan, about an hour north of Detroit. So definitely apple country, definitely corn and row crop country. My dad was in horticulture, more or less, throughout his career. And so we had gardens. He was very passionate about growing flowers. So it was a lot of that. Not necessarily was my interest, but it was always around. Mm-hmm. So I suppose now with the current project, I'm kind of hoping to live up to his, make him proud, as it were. And after school, I knew that I had to get a degree, but I didn't really have an aim for it, which wasn't exactly helpful. Like, I knew my parents would kill me if I didn't have a degree and move forward with school education so I could open up as many doors as possible. But I didn't have something great in mind. I was studying English, but it was again at JC, thankfully, because I didn't want to waste a whole bunch of money at a big university. And so that's where I was working in just warehousing, moving doors and like loading trucks for any of the Home Depot or Lowe's where you get all your trim and your doors and all that stuff. So it was night shift, and that got a little drab. Even though I felt super human because I could afford an apartment of my own, and I had my own car, and it was great. I suppose I could go to shows there in Detroit, and that was cool. But I was working with people who were in their 40s and 50s doing the same job as me, with, telling me that, what's what and where to go, and giving me advice. But the advice, it seemed to me, was going to end up right where I was. And so the Navy, or the service, was an outlet. And my grandfather was in the Navy too, so it was just kind of like carrying along those traits, if you will. And I knew it was going to expose me to a heck of a lot more of the world than my car would have, and so that brought me through into the Navy. And exposing you to so many different walks of life, I think, is a huge benefit for any of the youth, especially of America. But like, I can't just speak for America, for the world. Like, when you're stuck in rural Michigan, you're not engaging with the people from Kentucky or Georgia or California or Nebraska or any of the above. And so getting those different points of view, and not just having the movies tell you or your books tell you what it's like over in these places, it made a big difference. And certainly getting the chance to visit other countries and see that, bringing back to the wine thing, that it was a more a cultural thing than necessarily a economic thing that it can be, where it's like we're making wine for the elite or the people who can afford it versus the people that can't afford it. In South America in particular, I was finding that it was more of a cultural aspect. Like, you were out there working the land, and you were with your family a lot more, and it was just something to have at the table that was different than water. And the more I researched, obviously, it was, that was the genesis of wine in the first place. So it really resonated with me that was what I enjoyed about the product, because we didn't have wine at the table. Most of the family get-togethers would involve cocktails and beer. And at the time, craft beer wasn't even a thing. So we're talking the beer that, ironically, now I find very refreshing after a long day in the vineyard. But at the time, I was like, there's no nuance to this at all, and I don't understand the draw. But, it is what it is.
So you mentioned kind of discovering wine through the Navy. Tell me about. Do you remember any of your sort of initial wine experiences, or were there moments that wine started to resonate for you?
Well, particularly in South America, but also in Australia was where I was those were both the, because I couldn't find wine in Brazil, and let's see, in Bahrain they didn't have a wine culture or anything like that, and like when I was in Seattle, that wasn't what I was interested in. So going to Chile in particular, which was cool to have it all circle around, and then to be working this last harvest with the Chilean, right? And folks from Chile, and having that bigger perspective. Because I didn't know, and funny enough, I couldn't tell you the winery that I visited. It was just part of the tour that was offered. But it again just resonated with me that it had a bigger feel to it. And then in Perth, it just felt a little bit less about going and getting drunk at the bar. It felt more like I was interacting with the community and interacting with locals in a way that was certainly more responsibly social than just a fly-by-night. And it's cool with the Navy. You normally just remember the good things anyway. I mean, there was plenty of bad things. I mean, I'm not telling you the stories of cleaning the bathrooms that you had to do and stuff like that. You just remember these highlights that really stick with you and help shape like how you would want to engage with visitors. Because being in the wine industry, we work with a heck of a lot of folks coming from all works, right? And a lot of them, when they're coming from overseas, they're trying to be just as open as anything. And if you're engaging with them in a manner that isn't close to hospitable, like they're coming back to their country saying that was a horrid waste of time, and I will never go back to Oregon or California or the U.S. again because of that. That means a lot to me, to engage with those, I guess, visitors and represent what, not necessarily what our country can be, but what we can be as a whole populace.
So you mentioned earlier there was kind of a phone call question that offered you this notion of going into winemaking. What was your concept of winemaking at that point? Had you been exposed to what winemaking actually was at that point?
At that point, I was in San Diego, and while I had visited Temecula and participated in, there was a festival where you could stomp the grapes, and we took a picture, and and like that was the extent of it. I had no clue how the grape was grown, other than seeing that there was vineyards in neat rows that looked very unique to my orchard views of agriculture, or fruit growing, if you will. So it was, and I hadn't met a winemaker. I started studying wine tasting and like the different regions where wine was grown and made, and more often than not, I was met with pretentiousness that definitely steered the ship away from the Somm route and the whole service industry, because of that weird covetous sense of knowledge that I couldn't wrap my head around, and like, because it seemed like that was really what was keeping people away from wine. That sense of all the quote unquote work that it takes into studying it and understanding it, and like it's such a, you know, complex beverage and all of that stuff that, you know, when I would come home to visit in Michigan, people would just be throw up their arms and think that I was a snob or something like that, which was the furthest from the truth, when it was just kind of being intimidated by that block of knowledge that didn't necessarily need to be that way. So it was, I would argue, I guess, a more romantic notion of just being able to eventually be the artist that I didn't think I could be through music or painting or writing. And looking back on that, I still think that is the true art, and then what I'm doing is now a lot more agricultural based rather than ego based, which has made a big difference in my career as well. And I think that came from studying at Davis and understanding a lot more science about it, and the more you get your hands dirty with it, the more you realize that it's a lot more about the work than it is about the ego of it, or the cult of personality, if you will. Yeah.
So let's talk about UC Davis a little bit. Obviously, you mentioned it was kind of the first thing you found when you studied for wine education. So tell me about your experience there. What was your first impression of it, and how did it go for you there?
Oh man, I still remember being accepted, and my grades were good, and I just never saw myself as getting into the fine science college, or I never imagined I would get into Michigan or something like that, because I just didn't. My high school wasn't, I wasn't as focused in high school, but once I got really engaged with what I wanted to do, I went full bore, and so like there was kind of no stopping, and I just kept going and kept trying to gain more knowledge and figure out how to get in and how to. And so then when I get there, at first I'm just awestruck because it's such a different world coming from the little JCs in San Diego, which were great and definitely my speed, where like the classrooms were certainly smaller, and I never would have gotten through the calculus or the physics of those the requirements had it not been for that. Like, because now here I am in Davis, sitting next to people doing the pre-med go, and I'm that's not, I was just alarmed that we're in those same classes, and I'm very intimidated just for how large it was, and I just definitely felt out of my element. What was good about it was that my interest was still viticulturally focused, because again, everything that I was reading and anybody that was trying to advertise wine, they just kept saying it was about the soil, kept saying about the vineyard, kept saying it's about this weird T word, and just kept going on with that notion that I said, well, I have to figure that out then. And so immediately rolled into soil sciences and took all the vit classes that I could find, because with the program as an undergrad, it's kind of split in three, because there's a lot of overlap, but it's like either you're going the enology route, the vit route, or the business route, right? And you can pepper in language in there, and I mean you still have electives to do just like any place, but I knew that I wanted to focus the hardest on the vit science, because I think that's what I was naturally gravitated towards anyway. It seemed all the other enology courses were a lot more in the lab chemistry based, and not that it wasn't a strong suit, it just wasn't a strong inclination. I just felt a little bit more at home studying the ampelography and then like figuring out, okay, well, this green bean plant grown in these different soils is growing this way, and why is that? And that sort of laboratory analysis was a lot more interesting. And then again, the intimidation, I'm there, and when Peterson Nedry's there in her grad program, and wicked smart and just quick as a whip, right? And knew everything about winemaking already, and I'm like, okay, well, she's not going to give me a job, and so it just it steered the ship in that direction a lot more, and I was thankful too to have those grad students in the program too, because most of them shed a little bit more light on the industry as a whole, because they had been a harvest or two, or obviously in Wynn's case, she grew up with it. But it brought more perspective to what I could expect and what my goals could be. In addition to that, I had the good fortune to get hired as a wine steward in Sacramento for an awesome little shop, 58 Degrees in Holding, which I think is still there. And when I was in California working, every time you went to the Unified thing, it was always cool to stop in, and the wine buyer was there for quite a while. I'm not sure if he's still there, but it's such a huge education, a definite contrast. And like, I had been studying and fumbling through the shelves with finding either the coolest bottle that would impress my date, or the bottle that I couldn't pronounce that I had found in the book on what to eat with what you drink and so forth. And I was like, a chapless, what is that? And I couldn't find it. And then coming there, it really was a big eye-opener about not only what these regions actually represented in the marketplace for a basic sales sense of thing, but also those taste profiles were really profound to me. And my roommates too were huge enophiles, and like always bringing different bottles around, and it was an enormous education outside of the classroom walls, where I was too nervous about getting the right grade, so I would just finish school so that I could get a job. It was some of those things. It's funny, you almost take them for granted because you're there to get the degree, to make sure you're not wasting money or whatever. But in hindsight, that some of those times were the bigger education pieces, because I still have all the science books and so forth, and like half of them I don't even use. Like I know where to reference stuff, and there's good reference material, but it's interesting what you take away, and how the enormous stress of importance is put on some of these aspects of the curriculum, which is great, because I still think it's a place to learn how to learn, not necessarily what to learn. because putting a lot of those pieces together made a big difference about how I engage and problem solve. So the big thing was like, oh, well, Fresno will teach you how to do the hands-on, and Davis will teach you how to research. And I'm thankful for that dichotomy, because it does show you, like, some people, they fall into the Fresno program for the same reason, right? Because they saw it on a Google search, and that's where they ended up, or they grew up around that area, and that's where they ended up, and, like, more power to them. But other people, maybe they are more inclined to the hands-on and learning that way, and other people are more academically inclined. And I just made sure that in my career, once I got out, that I focused on the hands-on, because there's a lot of people that can get stuck in the academics too, and I knew that I didn't want to be lost in that just constant research and trying to, like, there's so much research that I do on a day-to-day basis anyway with hands-on learning that I knew that that's why I wanted to do winemaking in the first place.
You mentioned sort of viticulture as your target area from the beginning. With your background, was there anything? Were you prepared for viticulture as opposed to other kinds of agriculture, or was there a big difference that you had to learn about growing grapes versus growing other kinds of crops?
That's a great question, and a very important question. I think coming from how I approach viticulture now versus my understanding then, it's all based on other pieces of agriculture. I definitely studied a lot about grapevines and everything, but man, did I have the blinders on. And I don't, in hindsight, I wish that I had just not even taken the wine studies and just done an agronomy focus. But I mean, you know, to rewind the clock and tell my younger self sort of thing. But it all adds up. You know, I wouldn't have gotten to, like I said at the beginning, like you keep chasing and you keep engaging, and as long as you're focused in the work, like these doors just keep opening up. And so I certainly didn't have an understanding of growing fruit coming from Michigan, which is again ironic because Michigan State is a huge educational resource, and just wonderful. To this day, I use them a lot. So it's a little unfortunate because I was surrounded by it, but obviously the row crops aren't quite as applicable, but they are in the sense of soil and the sense of what you're trying to create as a healthy ecosystem. I think all of the agriculture is a better course of study than what my blind vision of viticulture was. I mean, it's unique, obviously, in its own right for how the bud development being, you know, primary, secondary, and tertiary. That isn't in all fruit crops, and you know how we manage it and trellis it, and that's unique in its own right. But you know, I've taken so much more from palm fruit growing, cannabis growing, you know, vegetable growing, and just in the sense of like a healthy plant rather than a healthy vine. And certainly got rid of the whole notion of the stressed vines make fine wines dogma that has haunted our industry for the longest time for whatever reason. And I can only trace back to the same mentality that the service industry seems to have about this sort of like covetous sense of knowledge. It has nothing to do with how I engage with a vineyard now, and how I think about biospheres, I guess would be a good word for it, and like these little parts of cities of microbes and cities of life that are pockets throughout a canopy, throughout the soil profile, all of those aspects of it. I'm remiss that I wasn't interested in other parts of agriculture. And I mean, you go to Davis, and I'm sure it's probably the same at Linfield, but like stacks and stacks and stacks of books, and like all dedicated to wine studies. And you walk in there and you think that you're in the mecca of it, and like you're like, whoa, if I could just read all of these and not sleep, then I would know. And like again, it's a youthful sense of things. So now that I've got some years behind it, that now I can, have a little bit more confidence that I'm on a better train of thought.
So what comes next after Davis?
So, so I did the transfer program. So it was only 2 years that I was there. The summer of 2008, I had the good fortune to, again, get the vit side of the internship at Mumm Napa. There was 3 spots, and 2 of them, one in the cellar, one in the lab, and then one in the field. And I remember my other classmates, they they thought they were the cat's meow because they got the cellar and lab position, and I was like, I didn't even try for those. Oh well, it pays more, and I'm like, I don't care, and like that's what. So I had the awesome fortune to work with Doug Spinger, who was the grower relations manager for Mumm Napa. And my job was to scout the 20 different vineyard sources throughout the Carneros and Napa region of their holdings, and that was amazing. Just gave me an opportunity to be out there in the early morning, try to understand more about ripening patterns, and especially understand how those patterns were going to affect the programs that they had for their many tiers of sparkling wines. I brought the samples back to the lab and learned how to work some of their equipment, but there was so many bells and whistles in there that it was like, half the time you were pressing a number or pressing a button and it would spit out the results for you. Like there were titrations, but it was so codified, and there was a lot more. It felt like I was at a medical facility. And I mean, to be fair, it's a big company and it's a part of a bigger company, and so there's a lot that goes into it. But it was an immediate kind of like, whoa, back up. Like I don't even understand how this machine works, let alone how the different points of analysis are adding up to this point. I just was really excited about, well, how are we getting these crop levels to where we want them to be? And then how are we managing these vines with our spray program in order to get us to our goals when I have this challenging grower over here who's not meeting his goals, and like, how's that affecting our relationship with them? And, you know, oh, we lost that contract, so where are we going to pick up more fruit? And all of those questions were a lot more fascinating to me. And while it was only a summer, that really started the ball rolling. And like, dream job is grower relations, dream job is grower relations, that's great, you know. And so it was just drilled in my head about like, how do I engage different vineyards, and how are those relationships so important to a brand profile. And like, it seemed like Doug was the underdog too. Like, while people were fussing over, you know, why this wine and this blend is going to be this way, and no, I want it this way, and all those different arguments, like, we were our own entity all itself. And it was really rewarding to have that kind of mentorship without any of the noise that is really a part of those businesses, and that I just had the good fortune to not really be a part of. Because again, a lot of what I knew for myself is that if I was going to work for a bigger company, I knew I was going to get pigeonholed. I knew I was going to get stuck in some warehouse, humping hoses, splashing water around, getting into a tank. And I knew that was going to happen anyway. So why pigeonhole myself into those things? So at the graduation, or before that, is when all the jobs get posted for wine jobs and all the internships, and we're all vying for the same positions and like jockeying for it. And like, here I am with barely an understanding, let alone a background, let alone contacts or, you know, ins or anything like that. And so got turned down for a couple different internships, reached out for Spain, tried for that. Nope, wasn't going to have it. Luckily got a nod from William Sellium. And that still to this day is one of the fondest memories that I have. I put it as, I hate to put things on pedestals or try to make them too precious or something like that, but memories are memories, right? And like, we're allowed. So like, that has always been like my benchmark for how the interactions were with the team, and all walks of life. We had folks coming from Australia, New Zealand, England. So we had a Frenchie that came in there. So, and it wasn't necessarily about that. It was more like, these guys are this interested in Pinot, just like, oh, and you know what? I'm remiss. The reason for going to William Sellium was just, that was one of the many in the Sonoma area in particular that I had kind of honed in on after selling wine in Sacramento, about where I would think I would learn the most, or could engage with the most level of quality that I was finding in the bottles that, one, people were buying, and two, that were engaging me. I didn't catch on to the cab scene and even the Napa scene. The Napa scene seemed just over the top to me, and I was barely able to put gas in my car, let alone drive a fancy one, you know. And those aspects of it just made Napa seem so far-fetched to me that I never really went down that rabbit hole of the heavier wines or the that style of things. There's great places in there too. Like working at Mumm opened my eyes to like the Dunn family and like how cool their story was and how authentic their product was. But they were so boutique-y that it was those things seemed to me, well, I don't have the contacts for that and I don't have the family ties with that, and any of those smaller ones that like we all knew about Screaming Eagle, we all knew about Harlan, but it was like, man, the small kid from Michigan is, and maybe I was selling myself short, but I just rather engaged in the Pinot and Chard world because it seemed a little bit more communal to me, and visiting the area, it just seemed more my speed, let's say. Again, lucky to have gotten that. I mean, there was 13 of us, I believe, but folks from Oregon as well, and it was so rewarding to work with that many people and that was my first go, and so I'm the guy going, which one is citric and which one is proxy? You guys keep saying these words, but I don't. What's the difference? And like, what's the one that looks like citric? And I'm like, come on here, And didn't you go to Davis? And I'm like, oh crap. And then, funny enough, I end up being the last man standing, and stay until February of the following year, which, again, very rewarding experience to be able to carry a lot of that all the way from grape to bottle, and get a bigger understanding. And at the time, Williams-Sonoma was going through its own kind of changes. They were moving into the new facility that they had just bought, and expanding and looking into more vineyard sourcing. So there was a lot of movement going on. I think Bob Cabral was thinking about his future as well, and what he wanted to do outside of Williams-Sonoma. And that was eye-opening too, because here I am, the guy, at any point being like, I volunteer as tribute, okay? Just give me the job. It's fine. It doesn't matter. I'll clean all the tanks. I just want the job. And he's the pinnacle of it, and already had been there long enough that he's thinking about changing gears, and that was a little bit of a eye-opener that, like, okay, I don't need to chase after this status quo of what these the labels that come with job titles seemed to be so, like, covetous again, like, oh, well, you're not anybody unless you're the cellar master, or you're not anybody unless you're the enologist, because that's how you make it to assistant winemaker, and then that's the only way you can make it to winemaker. Like, all of that stuff seemed to go a little bit out the window and be like, it's not it. Each different company has its own set of needs for personnel, and that's not, the titles aren't necessarily going to matter as much as the work, and having the right people in place to make the work sound so the people could make better decisions, right? So then after Williams-Sonoma was New Zealand, and oh my god, thinking back on it now,
I don't wish 14-hour plane rides on anybody. I don't care how many movies they show. I don't care how many free beers you get. My goodness, that's a long plane ride. And then to come there, and so I was in Central Otago at Shard Farm, and that was also a total luck. So the guy that I was working with, he had been there the last harvest and kind of recommended me, and I was so nervous about it. Like the interview question was, well, what kind of wine do you like to drink? And I'm like, oh, I'm really into Riojas lately, and I love how it's distinct and it's character driven. And then no response, and I'm like, oh shit. He thinks that I just like oxidized wines made from Tempranillo and all these other obscure varieties that have nothing to do with Central Otago. He's totally thinking I'm a joke, and that's crazy. And it couldn't be further from the truth. Again, I volunteer as tribute. Please just pick me. I just want a job. And it just mattered that you were interested and passionate, and engaged. And out there, it's tough to find help in Central Otago. The sheep do a lot more in the vineyard than they do in the cellar, right? And so finding that help for that short amount of time is usually difficult. So got a chance, got down there, and again, totally different world. And it's one of those things where normally you're paying attention to your boss who's telling you to clean this tank or move this there or whatever, but I'm just lost in the epic nature of the landscape. And I'm like, you said what? And I had never been exposed to anything that close. I really liked Sonoma, and I liked, the pretty vineyards and the rolling hillsides that would be out there, and Napa the same. But my goodness, what New Zealand has to offer is, obviously second to none. And that was really jaw-dropping. And the facility there was on a cliff, and it's where they had the first bungee jumping over there. And just very you're driving up the road and man, you better be spit sober on that, because one wrong move and you're over the cliff, right? So that was really cool, and just whoa, we are on the edge of it. And you read about this and you see them in books, but just to experience that. And it was also it was a very small team. It was a team of 4 of us, and at the end of the day, they went home and I stayed, and so it's me to my lonesome until so the other 4 was Ariel from
Yamhill Valley.
Yeah. And so quickly fast friends, because we're the only ones out there and we're just stuck there together. All you had to do was go wander the estate vineyard, try to learn all the different barrels that they're using down in the cellar. And that was my first foray into stacking barrels rather than using racks or equipment or anything like that. We had an elevator that led the barrel down this shaft, and you'd be down in the depths of the cellar, and you'd have to wheel them around and chalk them, and we had to use a chalk line to get them just so, and 3 barrels high, and you're just whoa, this is a different level. But again, authentic winemaking, and I had no idea. I'm thinking to myself, man, why'd you guys make it so labor intensive? Like, this seems like, why didn't you put a door over here? But, open my eyes to, like, make your space work and utilize what's available rather than, like, pushing, I suppose, an agenda or a presumed sense of how to do things. John Wallace was great. He was another eye opener. Like, been there for years and was just like, I'm trying to think about what else to do. And I'm like, what? You're the head of the show. This is what I'm trying to be. Dude was so much more passionate about making beer that harvest than he was about doing what he had been doing year after year by a sort of playbook to their style. And he knew the vineyards, and we went there and visited them, and he knew the growers, but it wasn't his. It's not that he lost his passion, but he just had a different train of thought that I hadn't caught up to. So to me, I was like, no way, this is amazing. And they were working with biodynamic growers, and which I had only heard about and thought, like, tried to delve deep into, but just got confused and didn't understand, like, well, how is that going to help with your disease pressure, and how is that going to help with all these different situations when you just have this kind of dogmatic sense of this ethereal whimsy of trying to, coax the best out of these vines. And I couldn't figure it out. And it wasn't touched upon either. It's not like Shard Farm was the Felton Road, where that was their kind of guiding ethos and their guiding marketing strategy. Or so, like, I was like, well, I gotta figure out how to work over there and work somewhere like that. And, like, started diving deep into what Litter Eye was doing and Ted Lemon, and, like, that was one of those names that, again, are these, like, pillars of the industry. And, like, John knew him, and everybody knew these kind of who's, and, like, I was linking them to these practices, which in hindsight it couldn't be further from the truth. Like, it was such a marketing ploy, again, for this covetousness of knowledge to be kind of trickled down to us youngsters, to still give us the kind of romantic vision of it. And ironically, I've never lost the romantic vision, but I have my eyes open a little bit more to how these marketing shifts can influence a lot of how the populace envisions wine. Because now, taking away a lot of those practices, like, I can utilize them a lot more and understand, like, well, if I engage with silica during these moon oppositions, right, during the June and July time period, well, that's helping me combat powdery mildew, right? And, like, it has nothing to do with getting out there and doing a chant and being the, kind of this dogmatic follower of or disciple of Rudolf Steiner. Like, all of those things are great bodies of knowledge if you know how to use them. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it seemed like a story that I was being told from the same people who were trying to tell me that this wine is so much better than that wine, regardless of what your taste is. It's commonly known, so you should know this. Okay. So that was good to open my eyes to that, and the Cellar Master was on point too. Austin Black. He knew his stuff in and out, and funny enough, he was saying that the reason he got the gig was, one, that he had come from working in Burgundy, and two, he knew how to run a crossflow. And I see their crossflow, and it's just this mess of valves that he's running in front of me and telling me, and then you do this, and then you move this, and then you move this, and I'm like, are you kidding? I barely know how to take care of the tank. All of this, like, oh man. And it's so funny now that I work with crossflow and do it kind of as a part of my living, and know the ins and outs, and know how to break them, and know how to make sure that cider is correct so that I don't break them. But that's jumping ahead. So yeah, after Shard Farm, it was what I've always found myself in is shotgun approaching my next move and then zeroing in on that, and then feeling like I should have done that and overthinking all of it through the next course of my adventures, and going, oh man, I should have picked that, and I get accepted for the Literai position and the Antiquatera position, and then am on holiday in Hawaii and randomly get a call from Steve Storrs in Santa Cruz, based on just needing something to do during the summer, and having a friend in Davis who always said that Santa Cruz was a gas, so like you gotta get there, and like never having the opportunity because it was too far south, which is crazy. I mean, the car still worked, so I could have driven there, but I was just gonna work in the tasting room, and he needed somebody in the cellar and saw my credentials, and was like, man, you should come and just do, my guy's leaving because he's taking on his own project, and it's just me, my wife, and you. I got 2 guys in the vineyard with me, and they're kind of my hands on with that, but I have no help in the cellar. And I'm like, oh, well, I already committed to Ted over at Literai. I had met him over at Burn Cottage, and while I was there at Shard Farm, and I was over the moon thinking that, like, here's my gateway. Here's how I'm going to get into becoming the who's who of the wine industry, and knowing all of the secrets of how to make the best wines in the world. And like, ironically, those wines weren't my favorite wines. They were what I was told to like, and told to say that. And it, funny enough, now the reason I was told that, because Ted's brilliant, not from my perspective necessarily with the winemaking, but the quote-unquote wine growing, and learning, understanding how to take care of a farm ecosystem, and trying to integrate that into his life goals. That's what made him so unique, and that's what made him such a pillar of our industry to this day, and something to aspire to. And then on the flip side, Maggie Harrison, who to this day is an icon and also a pillar of inspiration. And not to digress too much, but you know, here in Oregon, I hear smatterings of her kind of breadcrumbs of practices touted as their ethos, and it's like, that was just like off the cuff sort of like practice, and like it wasn't her main thing. It was an overarching sense of how she engages with a project that makes the most difference in the wines that I always have been in reverence of. And I still to this day, I don't know if it's the rocks that she's putting in there, or snipping the berries, or the time that she takes into it, but I'm guessing that it's all of the above, as just the dedication to, again, the work. And Ted's the same way, and so I figured that I could engage with Storrs Winery in much the same fashion. And taking on a project with 8,000 to 10,000 cases annually, let alone to have vintages going back from 5 years ago that we were trying to work into a program and figuring out where they went in the marketplace. That was a huge amount of work. I mean, you should be sweating across the way just thinking about it, because I'm like, whoa, I don't know the style to begin with, let alone where the direction the train is headed. And at the time, Steve and Pam, they were really focused on getting an estate winery built on their property in Aptos. So that took up an awful lot amount of their time. And so here I am with, dozens upon dozens of barrels, ranging from any different numbers of chemistries and styles and focus and all that stuff. And coming off of my time at Williams-Sellium and Shard Farm, I was the cockiest guy on the street, and I was like, I got it, and here we go. I'll run all the analysis, and I'll know all my numbers through and through, and you know what, I can make it. And I tasted some of the wines. I'm like, great, super duper. Had no idea what Santa Cruz Mountains represented. Had no idea what how those vineyards differentiated themselves from others, let alone how vastly different each of those Santa Cruz Mountains were from each other. And that was a real gut check about, a year into it going, man, I'm not engaging this. Certainly not like how these guys are that are getting scores. Here's Reese right in our quote-unquote backyard doing these really cutting-edge things that I couldn't touch. Another guy who was putting microchips in his bottles and all of that stuff, where I'm like, whoa, I'm not even close to that level, let alone the hallmarks of Mount Eden and Ridge, who have just steadfast kept us stoked about Santa Cruz Mountains and California wine in general for decades, to this day. It was really exciting to see Mount Eden become or be included in the whole Dry Roots Coalition, just because it was like, here I am touting how cool the Santa Cruz Mountains were to people in Oregon, and people like, okay, sure, whatever, it's still California to me, Robert. Like, whatever. They're great. You don't know. And then, like, we try the bowels, and that's totally Primox. And then I would try another one, and it's like, no, that's their style, man. And like, no, you don't know. Like, okay, they're pretty cool, I think. So, thankfully, I stayed long enough to get more vintages under my belt. the young and stupid, still chasing the dollar rather than the goal of the work. I mean, there was plenty of work, don't get me wrong. Like, it was all there. And I just... Santa Cruz is rather expensive to live. And I couldn't see past my blinders of, like, how the hell am I going to get ahead? Like, my car is about to die, and I don't even know how I'm going to buy a new one. And they're going to move a half hour away to make the wine. I don't know how I'm going to make it there. Oh, man, I'm confused here. Wine jobs, and no. And so if there's one takeaway from that is, like, that's part of the grind too, of understanding that you're going to continually be turned down, and you're never going to live up to half of the people that you think you are on par with. And it's not a competition. It's just like finding your groove and finding your fit. And funny enough, stores was such a good fit. But I couldn't see it. And I can only see it kind of now because of the position that I'm currently in and how similar it is. So I had a little bit of the good fortune to get a vineyard tech or assistant PCA, pest control advisor position with a company down in the Santa Barbara, San Ynez area, Santa Rita Hills, Lompoc. Oh my God. To any of you listeners, don't go to Lompoc. Depressing is the best word to use for what's ironically making some really, really interesting wines. Just where they're making it and where you have to set up shop is horrendously depressing. Luckily, Santa Barbara was only a half hour away, and luckily I was in the vineyards a lot more rather than in a cellar. So that was a whole whirlwind of education piece, and wow, that down there is pushing a heck of a lot of envelopes and atoning for sins of years past. But that pioneering spirit and that real dedication to a craft and really like shotgunning approach, I can only tip my hat to that, because it's not that they didn't have the knowledge or didn't have the wherewithal. It was they had the guts to really put it out there and kind of learn from those mistakes and kind of engage it further. And Pierce's disease is down there, and there's a lot of phylloxera, and there's just any number of different problems that, again, I read about and was told and showed slides in Davis, and just going, oh, we definitely got to stick to these rootstocks then, or which is all like that's just what's leading to the problem, right? Is like that blind mentality that it's because it has this susceptibility or that susceptibility and has this range that seems to be okay that we can engage with, which is now, from where I'm coming from, is totally not how I would want to engage a project, and totally not how I would want to learn from an area. But they had plenty of cool vineyards and plenty of like hallmark vineyards, and getting to work, be out there on the Domaine de la Côte's place, like, just again kind of jaw-dropping how the views from there, and understanding okay, we're making these tiny vines, and we're trying to engage with this in the quote unquote Burgundian model, based on a lot of heads of state being obsessed with the Burgundian model, and that was really rewarding to see how Chris King, who's the viticulturist for them, how he was engaging with those projects, regardless of how many hairs he was pulling out to just manage them. That was eye-opening from a guy who definitely has a green thumb and definitely knew what he was doing, to be like, this one is going to be a doozer. How am I going to do this to make Sashi happy? I don't know. Here we go. Those sorts of things were cool to see and interact with. But those big companies too, they have all different aspects, and like you're trying to figure out, well, you're making biodynamic wine or growing biodynamic grapes here, and then you're doing organic here, and then you're doing sustainable here. And again, that going back to that goal of like, grower relations is the coolest job on earth, grower relations, right? Just getting an eye out for, wow, you really need to engage with all of these growers differently, and a lot of it is economics, and a lot of it is just steadfast, this is the way it is, and this is the way I've been doing it, and like these dogmatic rhythms, and looking at these things from more kind of marketing aspects rather than the maybe health of the ecosystem that is your vineyard, but in all of that in between. So that was a huge education piece. Sadly, it wasn't in the best place to set up shop, and went home for the holidays that winter, and just trying to collect thoughts and collect, where am I going to focus, and where do I want to stake a claim, and how. So again, wine jobs, how rejection, keep grinding, and in between that, stop at my where I had grown up picking apples, and eating donuts and having pumpkins, and kind of as a high school, you knew where to go and find beer and have a party or whatever. And lo and behold, what are they doing? They're starting a quote unquote, what they have wine here, and they're starting a program. And I'm here for a while. I wonder if they need a hand. And they were at the very, very beginning of it, and based out of a barn, a small barn that was parceled off because the third generation just couldn't get over the desire to make booze in the bathtub at Michigan State, right? And so convinced dad and uncle that he could get a program going and do it. And it's funny when the further you try to convince them to do that, and then they let you go with that, the more you realize that you don't know what you've gotten yourself into at all. There's so much more of the business that you didn't even see coming. And this is right from my perspective at the beginning of the hard cider growth or focus, I guess. Because we had the Angry Orchard and the other sugary pop drinks that were called hard cider that we all knew about, but certainly weren't engaging with. we would be too busy trying to make the best IPA from these clever ingredients and this foreign hop that's going to make the difference in my beer versus your beer, and and having fun with that, and really like, not necessarily learning how to grow it, but okay, this is a fun project, and like, this is a cool way to have my own kind of harvest party of my, And I've been home brewing. I got a second place at a Santa Cruz homebrew competition, and felt super duper about myself and my 5-gallon carboy, and all the different cleaning methods to do that, and learning about sterilizing stuff and understanding how important, but not really like why is pH so unique in the beer world versus the wine world. Just having an more focused view of that and growing that body of knowledge. So I was like, yeah, I can totally help you out with your cider program. I gotta go to the library, you guys. I'll meet you back here tomorrow, Monday morning. How's that? And just engaged it as a white wine, and said, you know what? I'll just make this the best white wine I could possibly make. Lo and behold, it's the simplest white wine I could ever think of making. In part because of the ingredients. But at the time, I'm like, what are you talking about ingredients? I got 40 plus different varieties out here in this orchard. Like, I'm bound to find something interesting in it. Well, that's true in one sense, but also, like, those 40 different varieties are really just part of 2 of 4 different kinds of apples, right? You got your sharps and your sweets. There's no bitter anywhere in there unless you got a bag of powder, right? And I didn't, the bullhead in me could just refuse to accept that, because what was great about working in there was it started the eye-opener of polycultural farming and understanding economics of farming and how the seasons keep the lights on. So we were growing your early, mid, and late season cultivars to harvest at particular times. And not only that, well, before that was the cherries, and then before that was the plums, and these were all methods to engage with the way rural community of Armada, Michigan, that is thankfully close enough to Detroit that people could come out and have a taste of the farm life every fall. And anywhere in between there, because there wasn't a whole lot to go visit other than that. Great antiquing in Romeo, but if that wasn't your bag, then you were either going up north through a different way, or coming there for the pumpkins and the cider that I was there for. So that was really what set the seed for how I'm approaching my work now, and what my goals, I guess, are now. And funny enough, it's the beverage on the table is the same in the sense of trying to engage the person across from me, not alienate the person across from me, So like cider, I mean, historically was the poor man's beverage. And I being the guy and holding up to my end of the deal and not caring about the money of it, I suppose I was fine with being the poor man out of the deal. And there was an awful lot of us that, if I was able to engage them in a more thoughtful way, could open their eyes to, why this farm can be special, and like why we're growing these different things. And yes, we have a fruit stand, and yes, you can come here and pick your own, but like, here's why it's unique, because I can change this quasi-simple beverage into something that is really opening your eyes and saying, oh, well, I didn't know that the plums could taste this way. And like, oh, like, I was just thinking cherries would be for my pies, and like I was never even doing anything with the tart cherries. Like, so now it gave me a couple more colors to play with, and I think that was a big eye opener about, because I had heard Maggie or any of the other number of cultish winemakers talk about how unique and special this vineyard or that vineyard was or wasn't, but I didn't really understand how that color palette could really change how you engage with the finished product. And so that kind of set that tone and that seed. Because yes, in stores, like, we had multiple different vineyard sources, but we didn't have all that. Like, instead of showcasing the vineyard sources per se, we had more different varietals, and we weren't mixing the Syrah with the Pinot, or the Chardonnay with the Pinot, or the Riesling with the Chardonnay, or anything like that. We just had different things to offer. It wasn't really trying to, and that's a blanket statement, because yes, we had different blocks of the Pinot, but I didn't have a full focus to that I suppose I do now. Yeah, so I mean, this keeps just going with that sort of thread. Is this still answering your question? Like,
sure
I guess
it
the
is.
question was like after Davis.
Yeah.
So like, this has been long-winded. Wow,
It's definitely
it's
answering
definitely
that
after
question.
Davis, right? So yeah, that was how cider got integrated and into, but it didn't change the interest and the focus, because then it just started changing how I thought about it, and like, oh, well, what about farming this orchard can I engage with in my understanding of pruning, and my understanding of ripening patterns, and understanding of disease pressure, and how, I mean, because you're dealing with a whole different set of problems, right? And that was a big education piece too, which was humbling, because it was like, oh, I was so dogmatic in my understanding of viticulture that I wasn't paying attention to half of the sense of just a healthy plant. And how is this plant reacting to what now I understand to just being a nutrient deficiency? And so it's manifesting itself through these challenges that in turn we're only engaging with a spray program. And the only way that we can, make it better or worse or whatever is if we spray more. Like, that's the only way we can go organic, because then now we're going to have to be on the tractor more. Did you want to be on the tractor more? Because we don't want to pay for it. And I'm like, oh, right. What a bummer. And like, Now, in hindsight, I'm like, no. If you were able to shift that spray program to engage with those nutrient deficiencies rather than just engage with the disease or the virus or whatever it is, it would start to bring those returns. But, I mean, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, can you? Right? And so, in terms of dogma, I mean, it's just as bad as anybody going down the biodynamic road and just being stuck in that. In my view, like, it's healthier, I suppose, the biodynamic and the organic, but it's still kind of like, if you're just staying static in an unstatic sort of realm, well, then it's still not building the health of the ecosystem. And that'll all tie into people too, and how what you're selling to people, and like what they're eating, and how you educate them, because a lot of that education would probably lead to more sales, right? But I gotta give them credit. I mean, they've been running the farm for 70 years, and like as a family, and over 1,000 acres. That is really impressive, with an annual influx of thousands of folks that you have to manage with kids from school or whoever you can find to work the registers. I mean, you're just trying to find whatever relief valve you can, and if you can make the dollars work in one way, well, you can. So it's kind of a choose your battles sort of thing, and it's not like all the fruit was rotten or all of it was gross or anything like that. It was just opened my eyes to a polycultural sense of running an establishment, and I knew that I had to dig further, and that I knew it wasn't just a spray program that's keeping all these things at bay. I knew that it was, because here I am growing stuff in my garden, and I'm not having to do any of that. And like, I have these other apple trees that I see that are wild, that were quote unquote neglected. I'm not seeing any of this pressure here. And so how is that happening, and how could I make an orchard get to that point where it's in its quote unquote natural state? Now, I mean, it's still going to grow all the way up there, and now what kind of ladders am I going to get the teeny fruit up there? But the point was just the health of that ecosystem. Yeah.
So at what point? So you're in Michigan now, and you got cider added to the kind of repertoire. Mm-hmm. So at what point does Oregon become the next step in the process?
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't say I'd always been rather obsessed with Oregon, and for really no other reason than it just. It was making it was producing some of my favorite wines that I could find. And like, I mean, back in 2006, I could get a bottle of Antica Terra for $35, not the $1.50 that it is now, right? And so with the same, I mean, she was still doing the same things to a degree, focusing, right? And so like, I knew that there was like a flavor there, and I never found it anywhere else. And like, there was plenty other flavors, but I knew I wasn't going to go work in Burgundy per se, and I knew I wasn't going to go, work in any of these other places where I liked the flavors. It just seemed like I knew I wanted to be obviously domestic. So, and having friends up here, and like every chance I could, visited here and visited different wineries, and I got accepted for jobs, but again, they were like, well, yeah, we can keep you for 2 months, and then, and I just couldn't stop. I couldn't figure how that could work. I'm like, well, what am I gonna do? Oh shit! Then I'm gonna have to go into the service industry, and that's not gonna fly. Like, I'm not the do you need more mayonnaise guy, you know? Like, it's not. So I always had it in my head, and the body of knowledge that seemed to be coming out of Oregon was a lot more vast than what I could find on California. Like, it seemed like the folks up here were really genuinely trying to broadcast information. Like, as soon as they found it, they were like, share it, because old boy down the road, he's going to be stuck. And if we can't get him up, we're never going to beat the animal that is California, and never going to get over that hump. So, like, we're dealing with all these rains, we're dealing with these hot summers, we're dealing with these root stocks that we thought were good, we're dealing with all of these aspects of, you know, Dundee versus Carlton versus, you know, the Shalem Mountains, and how are we going to engage this? And I thought it was so rewarding to have those pieces of knowledge at my fingertips, and just none of it was gospel, and none of it was like the way, and but it seemed to be the way of engaging as an industry. And like, even now, like, there's so many cool things that have been fully engaged with that I don't hear about as much, and maybe because it's blinders, but I don't hear about as much in California. I really feel that people are engaging with the farming here in Oregon so much more, not thoughtfully, because it's not like the Californians aren't, or the other regions aren't, the Washington people aren't, but it seemed like that was getting out a lot more. And what's more, being really engaged with the cider program, there was nowhere else that I could find genuine cider fruit, right? And so, like, I was going to these conferences or these get-togethers and tasting these different ciders and going, I have no idea how to get this. And I've gone through all the bags of powders, and I've tried all these different things, but, like, I can't, for the life of me, make it taste like authentic cider, which is still, who gives a shit, because who was buying it, right? And that was just for my own edification. So I knew that Oregon had a lot of those things, and it was just more interesting. And so Oregon, we came out for my buddy's wedding, and my wife and I were just poking around out here, and I was like, we gotta give this a spin. Like, I've been wanting an Oregon dream for the longest time, and I'm still having to convince her that it's the dream is real, right? So kind of make the leap. Packed up the truck and put a trailer with my motorcycle and all my books in there, and that was it. Like, we sold our house in Romeo, and again, to my lovely wife's credit, sold it kit and caboodle. So they bought all the furniture, they bought everything, because it looked as lovely as she made it. So lucked out for sure in that regard, and I'll forever be indebted for the leap of faith that she took on my quote-unquote dream, because it's certainly a work in progress, but it wasn't like we got here and it was like, well, no wonder you were obsessed. Because I'll tell you, the Pearl District of Portland is very different from the rural district of Michigan. So that was a definite challenge. But to your question, the Oregon thing was really kicking around because I was using it as a real big frame of reference, and like, this is going on over there, and they're searching for these aspects of these ciders for this, and like all the while, here's Nick Gunn at the same things, and he's like, Mimi Castillo's my wife, and yeah, we make cider too, and I had no idea who Mimi was, and I knew who Bethel Heights were, but I was like, super, man, that's cool, you're part of the family, and lucky you. You married into it. Nice work. But it was just like in passing. Like, how was the harvest this year? And like, I have a background in wine, and really, we don't care. What about the cider, Robert? I'm like, right. You're right. Sorry, I got off topic. No, but two is great. Nick's great. So those things were always there. And it was just like, how the hell am I going to do it? And thankfully, now, 10 years deep, the industry has grown to an extent that you can find opportunity that isn't so, just a needle in a haystack in another haystack, too tiny. And like, to their credit, pioneers, and so they were like, well, I can't pay you anything because I'm not getting paid. Like, how's that going to work? And like, so, but the leap of faith was good because I never would have met Matt Burson and gotten to work with him, Love and Squalor, and John Groschow, who I swear is the Mr. Rogers of our industry. I swear that guy's just a gem and just totally willing to help at any time. Just an open door for, knowledge and understanding. And then Vincent from Vincent Wine Company, also epic dude that just wanted to learn and just wanted to engage with the best possible wine that he could make, and humble as well, just like, I'm just a fledgling here, and I read about this, and I interviewed a lot of people too, and like wrote some stuff, but I think this is good, and I think I'm doing it right. And that was really refreshing to see that. And same with Matt, and like to work with them and have that sort of, there was none of this like, it's this way, and if you don't follow this dogma, then you're never going to make the grade with it. Like, everybody's just trying their own spin at things and is very open to share with that. And like, not in the sense that like, they're still making their style of wine and they still have a sense of how they make it, and their style is very beholden to them. But like, it was really great to see that, like, well, even if I got the same vineyard holdings that you got, I wouldn't be making the same wine as you. And like, what's more is like, I probably wouldn't get the same vineyards as you. So like, how you're engaging with it, I probably won't. Mm-hmm. And so it's just more of a philosophy and like how you want to engage with the project, not that it can only come from this vineyard, or it can only be in this barrel, or it can only be pressed this way, and any of those things. I think that's your role in the T word, If you engage with the terroir, you become the project, and like, let the project speak for itself. And like, I've always loved the sense of like, do things technically well. The artistry will come if it's there, or you'll just be making, you'll at least be doing the job, and you'll at least be doing the work, and maybe you weren't the second coming, but like, the point, just do the work, do it properly, do it well, and like things will rise on their own. You know, like you'll be surprised what your input actually was or is if you pay attention. You know, and half the time I always make the joke that I want to be the lazy winemaker, which, you know, it is more of a joke than anything, because it's lazy is not what you can't get away with lazy in the industry, first and foremost. And like, it's just more of like hands off as much as possible. But what does that mean? Your hands are on at a different place. And I again, going back to the farm aspect of it, I think it's wine growing, and it's an abused term for sure, but it's genuine if you engage with it genuinely, you know. So getting the chance with that to work with them opened a lot more doors to, and I mean, Portland at the time, I shouldn't say at the time, because I suppose it is what it is, like, but it's still, let's go pre-pandemic, if you will, because we've only been here since 18, so there's a lot of vibrancy that, like, and neither my wife nor I had lived in a quote-unquote city, let alone in, like, Portland's small in regards to, let's say, Seattle or, you know, San Francisco or any of these cities that I visited, New York, right? But still, like, there was a vibrancy and a very kind of like, it seemed to me like it was finally getting over the hurdle there where, you know, it thought that it was in the shadow of the Seattle markets and the restaurant scene and the quality of the cooking and the, you know, all of that. It seemed like we're on it now. We got some solid restaurants and some really thoughtful craftsmen here. And I like that too. Like, again, pre-pandemic, because I don't know now, but like, it seemed like any corner you turned down, somebody was making their craft version of anything. And then to, like, some of it being interesting and some of it being like, really, like, did that need a craft aspect, you know? But it still was like really vibrant with that sort of like bursting with creative energy anywhere you turned, let alone the wine industry and the whole, like, at the time, the natural wine craze was really, and it is still really big, but it was in its full throttle, you know, and like that was really exciting to, like, open eyes and open doors and, like, keep your wallet book fine, you know, because, like, a lot of those wines that you thought you liked, you could never touch unless you were invited to the Who's Who party or go to the restaurant and spend too much money and regret that. So this gave it way to, like, oh, there's interesting wine anyway. And I liked, there was, again, more of a communal feel to a lot of it, and, like, people were open about things and trying to, but then there was also the dogmatic people and, like, no, you can't do it this way and you can't do it that way. And it was just, it was an exciting time to see that happening, because, again, like, I thought biodynamics was the closest thing to a natural focus to things, you know, but I had no idea what Korean natural farming was, or, you know, any of this. Well, at the time, what was starting to be the buzzword of regenerative agriculture, or, like, any of those things. I had no idea what that meant, like, in regards to sustainable versus live versus organic, or any of that. So it was a big world, and, like, whoa, and it was fun to hit the ground running, because everybody was eager for the next place to open up, because they just wanted to crowd that. And, like, it was great. It was exciting to see everybody so, and I couldn't believe it. Like, I'm She's like, I'm just working. Okay. But the gnaw of working in the vineyards led me to chase down, and literally probably chase down is the best accurate, to work with Jim at JK Carrier, because he was looking for someone, but he didn't. He just wanted somebody to kind of pick rocks and do kind of grunt stuff. And my CV has this laundry list with a degree on it and all this stuff. And he's like, you're not going to be the guy that I'm looking for with this. Like, you're looking more for like a winemaker thing. So like, I'm just looking for somebody to help out getting dirt on their boots and stuff like that. I'm like, okay, I get it. And again, followed up like months later, like, did you find your guy? Because I'm still interested. And he's like, oh, okay. And he is friends with Matt, and Matt had recommended me, and here I am crying into my beer to Matt, going like, he didn't even want me, man. I thought you said you were friends with him. And Matt's like, dude, I recommended this guy. He fixed a bunch of stuff in the cellar. You're looking for a handy fellow or whatever. And lo and behold, I wasn't handy in the way that he was looking for. I wasn't the guy who can fix the tractor, sort of thing. And but I was the guy who could fix the air compressor and fix the clogged drain and fix the tank and stuff like that, and understand those things. But so he took me on, and it was great, because at first it was just a 1 day a week and just helping, and I was just tickled pink that I could be in the vineyard and be there with kind of one of the heroes, right? Like, I had known Jim's been around, right? And he's definitely got a name for himself, and his wines are great and very very stylistic, like very unique in his own right. And so like I hate to say fanboy, but like a lot of these times when I meet the people that I was researching it's for so long about Oregon, I'm sitting across from them going like, don't say something stupid, And so Jim was definitely one of them, and so he definitely he's rigid in his ways, and he knows what he wants, and that was exciting to like. I knew that he knew about the industry. I knew that he knew why he liked Temperance Hill. I knew he knew why, Croft Vineyard was such a way. And, he had worked with Macera and like all these other like vineyards that I had only heard about. And I could hear those stories now. And like we could talk about it like, oh, well, it didn't work in my program because of this, and now I had to thin down to these things, and really I'm trying to get the Parrot Mountain property all the way up to speed so that I can, just focus on this. And, at that wedding that my wife had gone to, I didn't know who he was, but John Thomas was there, and sat next to him, and he's like, yeah, I have a vineyard, and like, it's just a small vineyard, and yeah, I make wine from it. And, I like it because I can just do all of it. And everybody always comes and they want to see how I do it, but I'm like, I just do it this way because it's small enough that I can do all of it. And that stuck with me, and still has stuck with me. And that's one of those wines. Like it's not even the wine that's the big deal. It's the ethos to it, the idea of it. And I think Jim had that same thing right? He obviously got a bigger property, and the economies of scale tie into that, right? And so like now you can do different things, and it's double-edged, right? Like you choose your own adventure, and so now you're going to have to deal with all of these challenges because of the size of it, and now you're going to have to require having help, and you can't be everywhere all at once. And so that, I think, to him, he wants to be everywhere at once. He wants to do everything himself. He picked it so he could get his hands dirty and then think about it, and then like make a mistake and run into things and man the tractor and all of those things. So like I liked being a part of those programs where it was just, again, hands-on, like no bullshit, like none of like we aren't cutting the atom here. And like another thing that was great about Jim is like no preciousness, nothing. Like it was, we opened some nice bottles of wine, but nobody was ever like snapping pictures and being, ooh, like, whoa, I can't believe you opened this for me, oh my god. Like it was never, and like if that happened, he'd be like, shut up. Really, we could put it down, let's go back to work, sort of thing. Like that was really, I loved that aspect about it. Was just about the work, and like no crying or you're fired, sort of thing. So I mean, challenges, oh for sure, challenging individual for sure, but like driven and focused and passionate, and there's no denying his devotion, and still really, really thankful for that opportunity. And then the pandemic hit, and like Jesus, February versus July, totally different world. Here we are at a biochar conference over in I guess in the northern Willamette Valley, and everybody's stoked, kind of making jokes about having a mask on or not, and like I was just stoked to be rubbing elbows with Lauren Isold, who I had known is a brilliant viticulturist, and like Dan Rinke's there, and I'm like, no way, whenever I hear that guy speak, I need to take out dictation just to garner all the knowledge from that guy. What's his name from Minimus, making really fun wines. It was great, and like afterward driving home and being like, well, what did you take away from that, and what do you think about that, and how could we integrate this into our compost program, and like, are we doing the compost right, and like all of that, like further engagement. And then like I got the Sommelier book in French, and I'm like, we could bring this, we could look at this, you guys, right? Do you speak French? No? Oh, shit. Your daughter does, she can translate it, right? And so like fumbling through that and going like, we should prune this way, and like, what about this, and we're looking for this, and right, is this right, and like get a block to like actually experiment with, and like, man, having the world change in that certain way, I certainly wasn't prepared for it. It's not like, yeah, I got this, like nobody could tell, and part of it didn't, the only thing that changed, like we were still coming to work, like it was just three of us, and like thankfully the work didn't change. We still had to be out there in the vineyard, and like obviously you be over there, I'll be over here, right? And but you still have the news on when you're driving to work. You still go home to your loved ones, and you still go, at the time we were living in West Lynn. And so, like, even though the grocery store was right across the street, we didn't know when we could go in there. We didn't know what we could get from there. We didn't know what the neighbors were doing. We didn't know what the hell, if I could get gas. Like, any of those aspects were like a big, like, drain on just people in general. And it was palpable. Like, it wasn't like people, we're just going to tough this out. And, like, you know, thankfully, you know, the government's taking care of us, and, like, they know what's going on. But, like, and it just kept spiraling, you know, as you know, right? So, like, all those things were really challenging to just keep the ball turning, keep the train on the track. Because, like, well, what is going to happen for harvest? Are we even going to have a harvest? How are we going to engage with the crew? Like, the crew has to come out here and do these kind of heavy lifting. Like, we're here to spot check and take care of the cellar, but, like, man, how are we going to engage with them? We don't know where they're coming from either. And, like, all of that stuff, it was just very challenging. And then now all the restaurants close, and, like, now your distribution channels change, and now you're just, the whole mentality changes, and it's just challenging to an already challenging situation. And then, you know, we have a horrible set. Horrible is a weird word, because we were excited for the vintage, because it was gonna be like one of those gangbuster, you know, knock it out of the park. Like, wow, I'm surprised that it looks this way, and wow, like, some of the, you know, flavors that I'm seeing develop this way. And, like, I don't quite know your site versus another site, but, like, I'm pretty stoked versus last harvest, where, like, you know, I was just learning it, but, like, I'm really geeked about what this harvest is going to mean. You know, like, I've been able to work on a compost program, and I've never done that. And finally, you know, I'm engaged with this pruning method. I want to see how it goes, because I was used to just spur pruning, right? I hadn't come into cane pruning, and certainly not to the precision or, let's say, thoughtfulness of the Sommelier methodology. So, yeah. It was just, real drag for sure. Then lo and behold, the silver lining comes out of it. Who's looking for help? What, Rosa? What? They're always just taking Frenchies. Like, you can't get in there. Like, they're the snobbiest of the snobby snobs, right? Which isn't true, but again, to that, like, marketing sense of things, it's like, whoa, how much, man. And it was also kind of like this ever-evolving, shifting thing that started from the Evening Land project, and then shifted to this, and then other people left, and you know, I listened to Ryan's talk, and I was like, oh, that guy's on point. This will be really cool. And, like, shot it out there as a maybe. Used to getting rejected at this point, so, like, very surprised when I got the call back, and, like, really. So met with Felipe, totally open, totally excited, still nervous about, he was very nervous about the pandemic, and, like, very on top of what are we going to do, how are we going to distance ourselves, how are we going to wear a mask, how are we going to do this. And aside from that, it was just like eye opener after eye opener after eye opener, just like, what, you guys are doing what? And, like, I've thought about these things, but you guys are actually pulling this off. And I'd read about the Pedro fella because Alice Faring had mentioned him, And like I was just knee deep in the whole Sommelier thing, and lo and behold, you're having them come out. How are you having them come out? Nobody can fly here. What are you doing? So it was just like, man, like I've hit this like pinnacle of what I envisioned for my winemaking career to be, you know, which is still like silly. Again, like hanging on almost to a dogma, right? Because their whole dogma is focused, but like I'm not at the current place. I'm not going to be. I can get out there with a shovel, okay, but I'm going to be surprised if I can bring a backhoe in there and dig the soil pits. Not that it isn't important. Their scale is a lot different than what I'm working with, but the focus and the ethos of it was really exciting, because I hadn't thought about how electroconductivity could influence vines and an ecosystem so much. And so it took me down the rabbit hole of thinking of, well, it isn't nutrients that all these plants are growing from. It's energy. And it's that sort of tie to that, you know, conductivity. Like all these plants are just antennas, and like how are you tuning into those? And then what's more is like, how are you tuning into that vineyard, and how are you parceling that off in order to make the best possible decision that you could? You're trying to gather as much information as you can first, and then just stick to kind of traditional winemaking, you know, like harvest on freshness and be delicate about it. Don't abuse it. I mean, they have some capital behind them, so like very nice tanks, and you know, all glycol jacketed, and you can really dial in a heck of a lot. But I would argue without that stuff, they'd be making just as interesting of wines, and certainly very honest and authentic, which was really, really great, because it wasn't like we're natural or we're biodynamic or we're any of the above. Like Natania's focus was all about health of the vine and like rehabilitation of taking over vineyards and rehabilitating them, and like, well, how are you engaging with that? And it's nothing like I had thought of, and nothing like we were practicing anywhere else. And it was all kind of straightforward. Like it wasn't, again, not splitting the atom. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that Pedro Parra is rather brilliant, but it's also like he's paying attention to rocks, and he's paying attention to the geology, and he's paying attention to kind of that science of things, but it's still leaving it up to you to interpret those. And so I really liked that aspect, and that gave me a lot more confidence that I don't need to see what necessarily the chemical analysis is of these things. Yes, I want to make sure that there's nutrients to my musts. Yes, I want to make sure that my sulfurs are correct. But that's going to be variable because of the places that I would source from. And your source, you're seeking these particular vesicular basaltic stones that are making this particular wine. And it's certainly a unique wine, but I know that I would like other wines just as much. And it can be engaged with just as much. And that was really rewarding about that experience. That so much so that it was like, you know what? Let's dive deep into something like this. We're living in West Lynn. I don't see where this is going to go. I'm commuting an hour to McMinnville, back and forth. I'm exhausted. You're not stoked because I'm never here. So like, let's find something else. And like, I mean, it was going so far as like, oh, the Finger Lakes are doing something interesting, and like having that outside perspective. So we had a fella from Spain and from Chile, best cellarman I have ever seen. Oh my God, he put me to shame for sure. Like, I'm like, oh man, I thought I was pretty good. No, he was on it. But their perspectives about the industry and the other places certainly didn't have a deep dive into Chile, which again was ironic because it kind of started there. But like, you know, one of the coolest takeaways I had from the whole Chilean sort of influence was that temple that they have over there in Santiago. The dude took something like 16 years, or I'm not positive if that's the right number, but like it was a singular focus to create a sacred place, right? And it was all just based on light movement. And that was really like tied in with this whole like digging pits and like parceling off the vineyard a certain way, and like, you know, all of those things, having all of that culminate. It was really inspiring in that way, that I'm looking at this all backwards and like focused on the weirdest things. Like, my spray program needs to be this way because I'm just paying attention to disease pressure, and it's going to be based on how the weather is right now. And oh shit, did I pay attention to the weather today? And like, did we get up early enough? And do we have enough of this, that, or the other thing? And it's just like, whoa. I need to reframe all of this and like get a sense of like, what am I trying to create with this? And it kept coming back to like I guess a sacred space where like, and that sacred space has everything in sync with each other. And so like in the sense of that, like that vineyard is a ton of different antennas that you can tune into. That now has been kind of the focus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So tell us about Botaniety then, and how it ties in to all of this.
Well, to be fair, I still need to mention. Botaniety started as. We can take the. You don't want to harvest the rest of this? What? Well, it doesn't work in our program. And sure, have a go. Really? Oh, well, great. Finally proved my wife that I actually can make wine, and not just work somewhere making the motions, and like not necessarily being the head of state. Like, we can do this, babe. I'm telling you, it's so straightforward. So that's where that started, and it evolved into like, well, how else are we? I don't want it to just be this wine at the table. I also like it to be, well, what else about a farm would be interesting to engage with and educate? To go back to like, huge inspiration was ironically Mimi, because I say ironically because I didn't know who the hell she was, and I didn't piece that together until much later. And she was one of the first ones that I met when I came out here trying to find something. And she was just so open and forthcoming about everything. And just like, her place was really nice. I knew she was selling fruit to the who's who's. And so like, I knew she was on to something. And like, the more I heard her speak about what she was on to, the more it was like, oh, right, exactly. That's exactly it. It has nothing to do with this like luxury item. It has everything to do with how you're engaging with an ecosystem, including the people you bring into that ecosystem. You know, whether it be your table, whether it be your house, whether it be the holidays or the restaurants that you, engage with or whatever. And so like finding this, again, testament to my wife, who is obsessed with everything antique, and rightfully so, very dialed with her aesthetic and kind of another singular vision sort of individual in the world here. So I'm totally thankful for that sort of eye-opening sort of. I've been to antique shops and I've seen different houses, but like how you can engage with a place and like bring people to that, like, man, Field of Dreams is one thing, but as soon as we built it, they certainly came and they were certainly intrigued. And so I didn't want like I can't grow a vineyard on here for anything to speak of, but what can I grow? I can grow vegetables, I can grow flowers, I can engage with a fruit stand that was one of the first here in Salem, like kind of rejuvenate that. Like as I had said before, we got the property out of a divorce, and it just seemed like they picked up and left halfway in. And so the original owners, no less, the guy was in the Navy and retired and bought the farm, and he and his wife took care of the orchard and were selling stuff. And sadly they couldn't convince the next generation that it was worthwhile, and so here we are. And so kind of like it's a cool legacy, you know, and I like that sense of carrying that torch with integrity, and not just doing it rote, but like, you know, what kind of compost would be the best one? Okay, what if I do some research? Well, why is this compost good? And like, why should this be used? And when should this be used? And like, what are the critical points of plants' growth in general? And how can I engage with those? And like, you know, kept coming back with different themes, like worm composting, the Johnson Sioux bioreactor, and then like seeing those results and being able to test those, and like getting actual tests that are real time rather than just kind of like snippets and like overarching, more of like real time, so that you can make definitive decisions that won't waste and are truly engageable and can cut costs. So that was the impetus with it. And now, so I'm at I'm taking care of the vineyard at Stangland, and now making the wine as well. And in addition to that, to make all of this work, running the smoke remediation program with Cascade Mobile Services, all in the guise of how can you engage with the industry a little bit more while keeping your eye on the prize, and really dial in. Like, Stanglin's small enough that I can do all of it, which is awesome, because on the one hand, I'm don't get me wrong, I'm not like I don't have it all dialed, but here's a guy that's been doing it for, he's been in it for longer than most, and he's a guy I hope you connect with and interview, because he's got some great stories, and just a lovely man, and a good fit. And again, like finding those good fits and being surprised. I come back to it. I got there and I'm like, I just engaged. I'm like, oh, do you need help pruning? Because I'm really into this like pruning method, and I'm trying to engage with it. And like, I was lucky enough to meet with the one rep from Sommelier, and get a little bit of a tutorial. And like, again, it's more of like an overarching philosophy than it is necessarily like it's all practical, because obviously you're pruning, but it's just like how you're engaging with it, and how you're engaging with living tissue per se, right? And like, what are you actually doing? We're not trying to focus on yield or anything like that. We're focusing on living tissue of the vine and making sure that that's growing in the best possible way. Well, that doesn't just tie in with pruning, it ties in with your nutrient density of said plant, and how that can mitigate any of your disease pressures or your insect pressures. And then what's more is, how can I engage with the soil so that I can build up that fertility without having to do a lot of inputs. And it's small enough that I can do that and see the results. But it's small enough that I'm losing the economies of scale. So it's, again, a trade-off, but I couldn't ask for a better way to engage. And like being just smitten with the Yola Hills. Like I don't know, like there's a lot of wine being made in Oregon, but it's the Yola Hills that has really captivated me. And now we're working with 5 other sites, some of them really high elevation, which is exciting, and also some of which are challenging. Like I went and visited my one grower, and like, why are we only getting 1.5 tons yield? I mean, that sounds cutesy from a marketing perspective, but it's all dangly and loose, and like, whoa, man, we could engage this a little bit further and get you back up to speed. Not that we need to buy more grapes per se, but like, now you could potentially sell more grapes too. And those interactions, again, grower relations is the coolest job, so like having that come full circle is like really exciting. And then being able to have a place where said barn could accommodate a decent sized production that is manageable with all the other projects, but not making it just so wine focused, making it more holistically focused, where we as a family of a dog and chickens can engage with a bigger community that we weren't a part of before, but now can be, and still keep my passion and my wits and my knowledge growing with the wine industry, and in a lot more focused way, rather than like chasing down the best job in the world with the best brand in the world with the fingers crossed outcome of them keeping me on for however long, and another crisis not pushing me out the door because the owner needs to take care of his own family. So now we can take care of it. It's getting to the true sense of like sustainability, and not just the marketed bastardized version of it. Like, I don't even know what the hell that meant for that. We're sustainably farmed. What does that mean? Like, I would think the biodynamics with it being a cycle is a sustainable thing. Like you're saying, like you're able to keep a job or keep the thing going. Is that's sustainable? You kept the business going. All right. Yeah, I suppose that catches up to speed after Davis.
Yeah, that definitely caught up to speed, and it actually covers all the questions that I have for you. So, is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything I didn't ask, or anything we should have covered, or yeah?
Well, again, to the testament to this program that you're working on and the collaborative spirit that I do believe Oregon has. I hope that the more that this takes place, the more people kind of get out of the way of the like, for instance, like how many great chefs have a cookbook out there, right, that you could purchase for typically like $30. There's some nicer ones, sure, right? Now you get that cookbook. I have a bunch of them. I guarantee you I'm not as good of a chef as I know it. Gabrielle Hamilton, amazing chef, right? There's no chance, and she's doing everything so simple, and that's her whole ethos, right? And then like folks like Dan Barber, who didn't really put out a cookbook, he put out an inspirational manifesto that you're like, whoa, I'm so behind the curve with nutrient-dense food and like that whole sense of things of like, how are we leaving this to other people, let alone taking care of the people that are here, I think it's so short-sighted to think that any of the projects that we're doing in the wine industry are like beholden or like nobody's splitting the atom. We're literally just taking care of vines and putting liquid in a bottle and like all trying to make sure that we can keep a roof over our heads. And so like it's out there, but I think we're stronger as a bigger populace, which is really exciting to me because like I can't tell you how many resources that I rely on that are very open and nobody has the answers either. It's not like they're like open about it saying like, well, if you give me $1,000, yeah, I'll tell you. It's like I don't know that would necessarily work because one, it's not going to work for my economics of my program, and it's not going to work for my site in particular because I'm only engaging in it this way. Like, what about all these other aspects of my nutrient density versus my pruning method? Those things to me resonate more, having that collaborative nature. And there's a lot of resources out there there's a lot of knowledge. We were literally yesterday, we went to a garage sale, chatted up people who had a blueberry farm, and we already are talking about all the different growing things that we're doing and like how to do it better. And I found, oh man, I messed that up, didn't I? And I'm like, oh, it's green, it looks nice, but understanding those things and engaging with them further, I think, is really going to keep pushing the industry further and make people a lot more aware of brand Oregon, and not being so much in the shadow of California that it has been for the longest time. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time today, for sharing your space and your stories with us.
Sure.
All your great answers. And we're going to go and let you off the hook.
Okay.